right, welcome to Austin New Church. We actually have people in here. It's crazy. Well, more people. Yeah, that's about it. Thanks for joining us today. Let's sing a few songs. We'll see what happens here. Come to the water, all who are thirsty. Come and drink. Come to the table, all who are hungry. Come and feast. Those who are weary, those who are needy, come receive. Come to the river, come to the river, taste and see. Come to the river, come to the river, taste and see. To the water, all who are thirsty, come and drink. Come to the table, all who are hungry, come and feed. Those who are weary, those who are needy, come receive. Come to the river, come to the river, taste and see. Come to the river, come to the river, taste and see. See that you are good. I will taste and see that you are good. I will taste and see that you are good, good to me. I will taste and see that you are good. I will see that you are good. I will taste, see that you are good, good to me. God, I'm on my knees again. God, I'm begging, please again. I need you. Oh, I need you. Walking down this desert road, water for my thirsty soul. I need you. Oh, I need you. Your forgiveness, like sweet, sweet honey on my lips, like the sound of a symphony to my ears, like holy water on my skin.
Dead men walking, slaves of sin. I want to know about being born again. I need you. Oh God, I need you. Take me from the riverside, take me on the baptized. I need you. Oh God, I need you. 'Cause your forgiveness, like sweet, sweet honey on my lips, like the sound of a symphony to my ears, like holy water on my skin. I don't want to abuse your grace. God, I need it every day. It's the only thing that ever really makes me want to change. I don't want to abuse your grace. God, I need it every day. It's the only thing that ever really makes me want to change. I don't want to abuse your grace. God, I need it every day. It's the only thing that ever really makes me want to change. Oh, I don't want to abuse your grace. God, I need it every day. It's the only thing that ever really makes me want to change. Your forgiveness, like sweet, sweet honey on my lips, like the sound of a symphony to my ears, like holy water on my skin. Your forgiveness, like sweet, sweet honey on my lips, like the sound of a symphony to my ears, like holy water on my skin, like holy water. Thanks for joining us today. This is so
Are we live? We're not live. You guys are the greatest. Could we get a blue piano next time? Yeah, right. I'm getting a little concerned about your socialistic tendencies with all this red up in here. It would be helpful if the whatever happened to the sermon. Let me know when. We usually nail it, Lorna. We do. Got it. All right. I was panicking there for a moment. I was panicking because Mark says, hey, we have people in the room. And I realized probably 131 people went, huh, what? How come I'm not? Right, because that's about what watches us live, something like that, right? Eventually it'll become more because everybody turns on all their devices, and the average American family has 92 devices. And so to our congregation of 12 that's in the room, don't panic if you didn't get invited to be in the room. It's not because you're not special. It's because Mark said there's a room full of people, and there isn't. But it is fun. He's referring to Matt and Lorna, who drove down from Dallas, who passed 400 great churches to come to this little place. And so thank you for doing that, bringing some energy to the room. It's good to be here. My name is Jason. If we haven't met, I'm sure we've met, or we will someday. But morning to everyone. I hope you are well in your pajamas. I hope your kitchen smells like bacon. That's for you, Ty, who's a vegetarian. Just thought I'd aggravate him. So this is week 2 or 3 of our new Preaching Fall series, depending on how you're counting. And if you didn't hear what Dr. Jessica Godot brought last week, I'm going to give you a little bit of advice. Don't skip it. Go back and listen. I would number that among some of the most important teaching I think that's ever happened in this pulpit. So she gave us a master class, in my opinion, on how to deal with the Old Testament specifically, but even bigger than that, I think Jessica named a possible model for retrieving and understanding all ancient revelation. Now, that's my major, so that might sound hyperbolic to you, but think about this for a second. How so? Ever ask yourself this question? What ties all these books together? What makes the memories and writings and the musings of such different men and women stretched across nearly 1,000 years of chronology, what makes it all hold together in a single coherent sort of entity that we call our Bible? I would say that the secret might lie, in part at least, in what Jessica shared last week and what she showed us on her chart. You see, what we have preserved in our sacred text isn't the only thing that God revealed to ancient people. No surprise there. There were people living and thriving in societies long before the early Jewish story begins, and there were countless other civilizations outside of the influence of the shadow of the Hebrew people. This is a collection of writing, though, that we preserve, and it was not the only thing that God said or that God was saying. But there is a theme here, and I think Jessica touched on this. This literature holds together, despite its diversity, its variety, even its occasional internal contradiction, because it preserves the stories of a God who consistently and systematically moved the people who were blamed and constrained upward and onward towards mobility and freedom and praise, which is just another way of saying liberation. Jessica pointed out something true about all biblical interpretation. And here's what it is. If you can't see how these old stories liberate the constrained and the blamed, then keep reading because you haven't yet found the point. And so this is key as we build moving forward. And I'm going to try not to give another intro today. You may know my love for watches, for shoes, and for long intros. I'm going to try not to do that again today. However, we are slowly building the foundation upon something. We're going to put something important. It's to help us understand the purpose of the prophetic office and what it takes to speak truth to power. Can anyone from their news feed tell me why that matters now? I'll bet you can. Samuel was the first prophet in ancient Israel, and he steps onto center stage chronologically right before the beginning of the first king, whose name was Saul, after the time of the judges. Samuel was actually a priest, a prophet, and a warlord of sorts, which is disturbing, but that's a separate story. But as Dr. Godot taught us last week, Samuel came from cultural insignificance. His mother, Hannah, occupied the lowest place in society, but God saw her. He heard her cry. Before God heard, she was totally constrained and blamed by her society for her inability to bear children to her husband. But that wasn't the end of the story for Hannah, was it? Her story changed when God got involved. She became mobile and praiseworthy because God took notice, or more specifically speaking, because God let Hannah know that He had heard her prayer when He moved spiritual leadership of that time to declare a blessing on her. And you might know where we're going now, which of course becomes the thematic arc of the entire book of Samuel. This is what God has always been up to, as best I can see from where I sit, elevating the plight and the personhood of the constrained and the blamed. Jessica said it so perfectly last week. This might be, in fact, the central moving part of the story of God in the world. This isn't unique to the Jewish world, and it isn't unique to the Christian world. This is simply what God is up to everywhere. Love embodied, love infleshed, divine self-revelation, wherever it can be found, which we know to be everywhere, it's always going to look something like this. It comes first to the constrained and to the blamed. It sets them free, empowering them to impact the world around them. It's the story of Hannah, it's the story of Samuel, and it becomes the story of Israel. And perhaps, most importantly, if we can accept it, it can become our story as well. So I mentioned 2 weeks ago that 1st and 2nd Samuel are about two things primarily. Number one, the character of leadership, and number two, the reversal of fortune, or the lifting of the blamed and the constrained. It's about the role of the prophet and of the office of the king and the well-being of those who suffer, people who desire good things for their families. The Hebrew people were well acquainted with kings. They knew what it was like to serve under Pharaoh. Even though God proposed a different way of organizing their society, they would eventually demand a king of their own, but we're not quite there yet. Before they were ready for a king, they had to make room for the prophets. And that's what I want us to think about today. What are the precursors to the prophetic office? What are the foundations? What must be true about a person before they can speak on behalf of God? 1 Samuel 3, 1 through 21 reads this way: Samuel's calling and prophetic activity. It's a bit of a long passage, so follow along if you want. I think it's important. So here's how it reads. Now the boy Samuel was ministering to the Lord under Eli. The word of the Lord was rare in those days. Visions were not widespread, and that's an important detail. At that time, Eli, whose eyesight had begun to grow dim so that he could not see, was lying down in his room. The lamp of God had not yet gone out, and Samuel was lying down in the temple where the ark of God was. Then the Lord called, Samuel, Samuel, and he said, Here I am. And he ran to Eli, of course he did. And he said, Here I am, for you called me. But he said, I did not call you. Go back and lie down. Some of you are remembering those early years of parenting, right? And little tater tots keep popping up and coming in. So he went and he lay down. Samuel was just a child at this time. The Lord called again, Samuel. And he got up and he went back to Eli and he said, Here I am, for you called me. But he said, I did not call you, my son. Lie back down. Verse 7, now Samuel did not yet know the Lord, and the word of the Lord had not yet been revealed to him. The Lord called Samuel again a third time, and he got up and he went back to Eli. He's not learning, as you can see. Here I am, for you called me. But Eli's paying attention. He says, Then Eli perceived that the Lord was calling the boy. Verse 9, therefore Eli said to Samuel, Go lie down, and if he calls you again, you shall say, Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening. So Samuel went back and laid back down in his place. Now the Lord came and stood there, calling as before, Samuel, Samuel, and Samuel said, Speak, for your servant is listening. Then the Lord said to Samuel, See, I'm about to do something in Israel that will make both ears of anyone who hears it tingle. On that day I will fulfill against Eli all that I have spoken concerning his house from beginning to end, for I have told him that I am about to punish his house forever for the iniquity that he knew, because his sons were blaspheming God, and he did not restrain them. Therefore I swear to the house of Eli that the iniquity of Eli's house shall not be expiated by sacrifice or offering forever. This is a complicated word for a child to deliver to their leader. Verse 15, Samuel lay there until morning, I imagine, wide awake. Then he opened the doors of the house of the Lord, and Samuel was afraid to tell the vision to Eli. But Eli called Samuel and said, Samuel, my son. He says, Here am I. Eli said, What was it that he told you? Do not hide it from me. May God do so to you, and more also if you hide anything from me of all that he told you. So Samuel told him everything and hid nothing from him. And then he said, It is the Lord. Let him do what seems good to him. And as Samuel grew up, the Lord was with him and let none of his words fall to the ground. And all Israel from Dan to Beersheba knew that Samuel was a trustworthy prophet of the Lord. And the Lord continued to appear at Shiloh, for the Lord revealed himself to Samuel at Shiloh by the word of the Lord. Interesting story. And so our story begins with Samuel, which began with Hannah, which began with Eli. You see, leadership begins somewhere. Something is transferred before anything is accomplished, and that's important to remember. And as much as I'd like to move quickly to the great victories of Israel and the cool stories about giants and dreams and kick-butt prophets, I want to begin at the very beginning of the prophetic office. Eli will be our doorway, and Eli is a stormy figure. So let's talk about unhealthy spiritual leadership, shall we? Sounds like a good conversation to have. But before we do, let me say this. This conversation makes me nervous for several reasons. Number one, I have served under unhealthy leaders before. Leaders who did great work, they did great good in my life. They taught me something I needed to know, who were literally door openers, way makers, givers of opportunities that made me who I am today. Unhealthy, yes, but entirely bad, no. And it's hard work parsing through all the good and all the bad in the hearts and in the habits of leaders that I have served under. I don't know about you. So it makes me nervous because of that. It's hard work. And number two, it makes me nervous. It makes me wince, if I'm honest, primarily because I am not unaware of my own capacity to wound and hurt and fail people. Jeff Sanchez reminded me this week over coffee that there are no pastors who can claim to be 100% positive. But I'm not just talking about the conceptual possibility of injuring people. No, I could take you to conversations, to specific emails, to text threads, to coffee shops in this great city where injuries occurred, where something that I said or that I did not say became the latest installment in a series of wounds inflicted by spiritual leaders on good people. I have been unhealthy. I have wounded others, and I am not unaware of this. So this is a delicate conversation to have. Eli, the priest at Shiloh, is a complex figure. Maybe you noticed, I'm hoping you did, that I didn't say bad leadership. I said unhealthy leadership, which is different, and it's a very important point to make. There aren't very many bad people in the world, at least not as many as we may be tempted to think. That's what I think anyway. There's a lot of people surviving and hustling and doing what they can to rise. Dynamic, for sure. Struggling, yes. Bad, I would say that's far more rare. You see, to be a priest or to be a prophet, you have to have a refined capacity to hear the voice of God. Samuel had to learn that somewhere. Someone had to teach him. Eli did. Eli recognized the voice of God, even if he wasn't hearing it personally. He knew what to tell Samuel to do when God's voice was heard those 3 times. And then he knew that the young boy would probably resist telling him the whole truth. You see, Eli was no dummy. He knew that when God spoke to the child, God had moved away from speaking to him and his sons. And he knew that young Samuel would resist him and would not want to tell him the whole truth that he had heard from the Lord. Yet, Eli insisted anyway. So it isn't helpful to think of Eli as bad, or Saul, or David, or Solomon, or any other leader we're about to encounter in these ancient stories, or any contemporary leader in your life or mine, say, for example, for that matter. It's far more helpful to think of them as unhealthy or not healthy. Everyone is a work in progress, no exceptions, and thinking about leadership this way allows us to see the dynamic nature of who people really are. What do I mean? Well, there are seasons when a leader might be operating from a place of great health and balance, and there are seasons when this may not be true. But assigning to a character in a story, whether it be ancient or modern, the label good or bad, all but certainly removes our ability to see the greater truth. It's going to be important that we understand that David isn't all good, that Saul isn't all bad, that Samuel is complex. You will see as we go. What happens in a good British mystery when you make up your mind too early who's good and who's bad, who's guilty and who's not? That's right. You fail to see the truth. You miss the value of seeing characters develop, which, among other things, squanders your chance to see yourself through them, which is, of course, always the goal. So a few interesting thoughts on unhealthy spiritual leadership. Now, you knew this already, but I'm going to say this anyway. This won't be a comprehensive list. Let's just take what the text gives us. So number one, it's possible to have the title and the vocation of spiritual leader and to still lose from time to time the ability to speak and see and hear what God speaks and sees and hears. The title doesn't mean the person actually has spiritual authority, or as Clint Black said in 1997, this is for you, Jeff, the shoes you're wearing, they don't make the man. You get my point. Eli should have been able to recognize sacrifice. He should have been able to see a woman pouring herself out before the Lord. He was the priest after all, but the sight and the sound of Hannah pouring her heart before God to him looked like she was drunk. Title? Of course he had the title. He was the priest of God at Shiloh, but almost no ability to see what God saw and hear what God heard. And like their father, Hophni and Phinehas, I think if I get 2 new cats, which I won't get, I would name them Hophni and Phinehas. But don't worry, I don't like cats. But like their father, Hophni and Phinehas were priests who served before the presence of God and the people, but they were in it for personal gain. The text makes that clear. They did not actually know God. So the title, here's my point, of spiritual leader alone does not equal healthy authority. So beware. Number 2, it's possible to be a child, literally or figuratively, and still be able to learn how to be sensitive to the voice and the direction of God. The text makes it clear that Samuel grew in his service and in his sensitivity to God, which I would suggest is always the case for healthy leaders. They grow. Samuel learned the posture that set the trajectory of his life straight. Finally, there's a natural progression. Before Samuel knew the voice of God, he assumed that it was the voice of his leader, Eli. Of course he did. What else would he have done? Which may not be wrong for a limited season of early discipleship. It just won't be right forever. Eventually, it's natural to grow up and distinguish between the voice of leadership in your life and the voice of God. You see, leadership matters. And there are countless things to say about it. There's hundreds of books written on this subject. But for today, we begin here. Healthy leaders learn how to listen. In time, healthy leaders learn to lead. Of course they will. They learn to organize and speak and plan and persist. But it all begins by learning to listen. I wonder, how well do you listen? I've spent the week worrying about how well I do as a leader. These are tough times. There is no room for leaders who don't hear, who don't listen. And as the story of ancient Israel unfolds, we'll see how leaders swerve in and out of health, how they sometimes listen, and how much damage they do when they don't, and how much this still happens today. Perhaps you've been on the receiving end of some of this damage. Maybe you've been hurt by the institution of church, by her rigid teachings and her unbending agendas, by her unwillingness to see your divine humanity. Maybe some of you have suffered because church or church leadership has forced you to deal with your own baggage. Maybe you've been triggered by church. But maybe, just maybe, church leaders themselves have injured you. And this can be tricky to name because it's not supposed to be this way. Baby food isn't supposed to be full of shards of glass and be spicy. Bunny rabbits aren't supposed to have teeth. They're not supposed to attack. And spiritual leaders aren't supposed to injure their followers. I love that sentence. I don't know why the team let me leave it in. Bunnies and baby food. That one should have been edited out, Sam. What can I tell you? I love that one. But listen to me. Spiritual leaders are not supposed to injure people. And yet, it happens. And some of you have this in your story, if not the majority of you do. I know I do. My first great spiritual leader was awesome. He taught me a lot. He also had a blacklist for everyone who didn't agree with him and left the church, which was a terrible burden for those of us who stayed to bear. My second great leader opened up the world to me, literally opened up the continent. He believed in my creative capacity and in the work that I could do, even as a young man. He pushed me to be better. He also turned out to be a predator. I wish I was kidding. International legal proceedings of criminal activity were for underage fans. Ugly stuff. It became a mess. Since then, I've gone on to serve under, with, and next to many great leaders who didn't do this kind of damage. Strong women and sensitive men. Good people who taught me well. And now I obsess about what sort of leader I am becoming. Am I listening? Not to the baseless accusations or angry attacks. Those come with the territory with a church like ours. They don't always need to be addressed. I'm not talking about that. But am I listening to my team, to my board, to my spiritual director, to my wife? We don't have time to go into all that listening involves here. Ancient stories won't tell us as much as modern social science. We'll never psychoanalyze ancient history. We know that listening involves empathy and open-heartedness and remaining undefended and willing to validate while listening and hearing someone else's story. All of that is helpful, and we'll talk about that a different day. We're focused right now in the beginning of what gives birth to the prophetic utterance. And how might we discern the beginning of the ability to speak truth to power? I'm suggesting that you should be asking this same question of me, of us, as the leaders of your church. I know that I am. Just because someone spoke for God at one time doesn't mean they still do. Unhealth can set in. Drift can happen over time. Power dynamics can corrupt the heart and the soul of people and institutions that used to be so faithful witnesses of God's goodness and His grace. It can move over time. So we're in this series to think critically about leadership, about who does and who does not speak for God, about who speaks truth to power when it jumps the rails. The first question we should be asking is this: are they listening? To those that are constrained, to the blamed, to the suffering, to the refugees, are they listening to the people in need? That's the first question we should ask our leaders. Are we leading well? Am I leading well? Are you leading well? Now, I suspect there's a complex answer to that question. I hope you're asking it of me as well as of yourself. I think leadership comes down to health. And health begins in part with listening. Eli taught his young protege well. Verse 20 of 1 Samuel 3, which we just read from, says this: all Israel knew that Samuel was a trustworthy prophet of God. Oh, church, I pray that the same will be said about us. Let's pray. Examine our hearts today. We pray those words, we whisper those words, we mutter them deep inside, those words that we know to be David's words in the Psalms later. Examine our hearts even today, Lord. These are not times for ego. These are not times for pride. There is no space to exploit, to take advantage of, to misrepresent. These are times for pure hearts. Help us to listen, to be sensitive, and to grow in our capacity to hear you. In your name we pray. Amen.
I could just sit and wait for all your goodness, hope to feel your presence. I could just stay right where I am and hope to feel you, hope to feel something again. I could hold on to who I am and never let you change me from the inside. I could be safe, oh, I could be safe here in your arms and never leave home, never let these walls down. But you have called me higher, you have called me deeper, and could be safe, oh, I could be safe here in your arms and never leave home, never let these walls down. You have called me higher, you have called me deeper, and I'll go where you will lead me, Lord. You have called me higher, you have called me deeper, and I'll go where you will lead me. I will be yours, oh, I will be yours for all my life. I will be yours, oh, I will be yours for all my life, so let your mercy. I will be yours, oh, I will be yours for all my life, so let your mercy light the path before me. 'Cause you have called me higher, you have called me deeper, and I'll go where you will lead me, Lord. Ooh, you have called me higher, you have called me deeper, and I'll go where you will lead me, Lord. You have called me higher, you have called me deeper, and I'll go where you will lead me, Lord. You have called me higher, you have called me deeper, and I'll go where you will lead me, Lord. You lead me.
Right. Thank you, guys. The subject of, I'm going to jump off script for a second. So you know this is live. This is not Thursday night. This is actually Sunday morning. The subject of spiritual trauma and the abuse of spiritual leadership, y'all, is a big one. I don't know that I know anyone who has not fallen under the shadow of leadership gone awry. For a million reasons, that's a conversation worth having. It's a conversation that I've never experienced in church. And it occurs to me, Sam and I always chat as they sing that last song, how that went, and I feel like we cracked something open that might be worth pursuing deeper. So it's a big subject. We could sit around dim lit tables and drink frothy, fizzy things and talk for hours. It's ironic, isn't it, how the institution that's supposed to hold fast the witness of God in the earth and the good news to the broken somehow goes sideways and becomes an injuring agency. Many of our kids opt out of the faith that we hold so dear. Why? Well, because they were injured. So, somehow, we'll have this conversation deeper. We have stories that could, I'm sure, offer enough of an open lane for you to bring your own, and I don't know how to do that. Maybe, Krista, you can help us figure out how to do that. But anyway, it's good to be back with you. I wrote a few notes here. So as you gather around the food that sustains you, I'm always looking for new ways to say this. We need to write this liturgy finally. Try to recreate it every week. As you gather around the food that sustains your body for the work of God in the world, just know that to be a Eucharistic exchange. Know that God's desire to be in you, through you, with you, around you is as close as the food that sustains your physical, divine body for the work in the world. So know that today as you do. I don't know what we're having for lunch. but it's going to be divine, I'm sure. We had clay pit last night, best Indian food in Austin. Don't ask me how, but we did. It was amazing. Also, a couple of exciting things coming up. We have a whole new website being designed starting this Friday, which is exciting news because until now, we're the only church in America with a website designed in 1981. I wish that was a joke. Thank you for that very colorful minor tone. We still work with some very old architecture, and so we finally decided it's time to pull the trigger. So good things coming. Can't wait for that to happen. Trey and I are on that. Also, this October 18th, so a week from tonight at 7:30, we are going to host a Zoom space, and we're calling it the world's fastest Zoom. The teachers in our congregation, in our country specifically, are working as hard as they've ever worked to pull off the unimaginable task of educating people both in person and at home. And so Sam's married to a teacher. I come from a family of teachers. My older sister, Jessica, is a 25-year career teacher. She's a teacher's teacher. She's passionate about this. And so this thought occurred to us. We're going to circle up on Zoom with a couple of beverages of your choice, and we're going to offer some encouraging words. Teachers need it desperately right now. So that's coming next week. So keep that in mind. It'll be quick. We will give you back the remainder of your time. No one wants another long Zoom, especially before the week starts. But be looking for that next week. Sam, you have a benediction?
I do, from one of our newer poets, Madeline Mosk. She writes, "To the church who has been hurt by the church, I'm sorry. I don't have any magic words or 90-day money-back guarantee plans, but I do have this. I have found truth and spirit and peace and love, and none of it where I was told I would find it. Was told were the only sanctioned, appropriate places to find it. I have found God in leaders, sure, but never as much as I have found her in the eternity of a forest. All of the trees around you, ancient and full of wisdom, never destined to be shared. I have found him in the ocean, the power of the waves that they can break down the boulders of the coast into grains of sand, the exhilaration of running out into their foam as a child and feeling them gently lift me up and gently set me down. I have found them in myself when I look in the mirror and marvel at the mystery of our tender biology, and in a diabetic stranger who tipped us a $100 bill back in March, even though he couldn't eat anything that we sold at our restaurant. I have found God in Netflix and in books about boys falling in love and in poetry written by atheists and in singing along to pop songs sung at the top of my best friend's lungs. The church could never be big enough to contain the essence of the universe. It will find you wherever your journey takes you. Go in peace. Thanks for joining us today.